What was the most ridiculous thing you got in trouble for at school? I saw Dust Devil for the first time and said, "What the?" I got in trouble for it. The teacher said, "Well, you could have said a bad word." But I didn't. Get over it. I've heard of thought crimes before, but this is ridiculous. Because you had the space to say a bad word. Hey, newsflash, teacher, you can say a bad word whenever you want. I could right now. Well, I can't. It's YouTube and I would get demonetized. You win this round. Story 2. In 3rd grade, I got 10% taken off of one of my tests for spelling my name wrong. When I went to go tell the teacher I knew how to spell my name, she sent me to the principal for smarting off. Yeah, I know how to spell my own name. Story 3. I doodled on my jeans in 10th grade and the assistant principal literally pulled me out of class and called my aunt to come get me. When she got there, he just started going off and pointing to me with the "look what she did" look. My aunt just rolled her eyes and said, "She's 15. I don't know what you expected." Story 4. Not putting my jacket and backpack in my locker. All of my classes were on the 1st floor in one end of the building. My assigned locker was on the 2nd floor and in the furthest corner from my classes. The administrators refused to move my locker. So pretty much every day this one teacher would write me up, and I got a couple of in-school suspensions for it. Finally, after a few meetings, I got the principal involved and she essentially told the teacher to leave me alone. Story 5. We had a girls' entrance and a boys' entrance at my secondary modern school, UK, in 1972. I was 12 and proud of the result of my first visit to a proper grown-up hairdresser, what we now call a mullet, but back then was known as a feather cut, and was extremely fashionable for both boys and girls at the time. I was in the crowd going through the door when a teacher roared, "You boy, what do you think you're doing?" Being very much a girl, I didn't take any notice, until I felt the hand of impending doom on my shoulder. It was my own form teacher who didn't recognize me without my waist-length ponytail. Story 6. I got detention for holding hands with my boyfriend in the hallway. I was 13, man. I also got sent to the principal's office because in 11th grade, I, quote, read too fast. It was that absolute jerk of a substitute teacher, Pam. Everyone hated Pam. She had a gross, wet, moist cough all the time. She sent kids to the office for literally anything. Screw you, Pam. What do you mean, reading too fast? Was it like a group reading session and you just finished too early? Were you reading out loud and it was too quick? What's going on here? I feel like I need more context, but I also feel like somehow it wouldn't help. Story 7. 2 months into 1st grade, I got suspended for lightly touching the arm of a teacher. This wasn't the first time I got in trouble with her. She was very, very strict. And I grew up with my rather laid-back mother, and I've been to a, let's call it, hippie kindergarten, so she was my real first authority figure. We were standing outside at the classroom door. There was a lot of noise, and I wanted to tell her something, but she wouldn't listen. I don't remember what it was, so I touched her arm lightly to get attention. I got suspended, and the school janitor watched me until my mom picked me up. I switched schools after that to a much more understanding and patient teacher. Story 8. In 2nd grade, I got in trouble for literally breathing. I was yelled at in front of my class by another teacher who was visiting my class, who saw that I breathed in heavily because she held our class up. She berated me and yelled how disrespectful I was. She made me cry and told me to sit in another class and write an apology. I wrote, "Sorry for breathing." Story 9. Went to a new school for a few months in high school. Every student had to wear an ID badge around their neck, visible at all times. If you got caught without your ID for whatever reason, you'd get detention. However, you could get a temp ID from the office for the day. Forgot my ID at home one day but didn't notice till after 1st period. So not wanting to risk getting caught by a teacher, I went to the office before 2nd period to get a temp. The secretary said it was very responsible to get a temp instead of trying to be sneaky about it for the day. Then, in the very next second, she wrote me out a detention slip for not having my badge all throughout 1st period and breaking the rules. Never understood that rule. Looking back, I honestly think it was a skeezy trap to get students to turn themselves in for some dumb reason. Public school is asinine. Story 10. So I was the good nerdy kid in school. My sophomore year, we had a new principal, and she saw some video that showed a guy with 12 guns hidden on his body. The new principal made a rule that your t-shirt had to be shorter than your fingertips at your side. I'm a small guy, so all of my shirts were non-compliant. So long story short, I was sent to in-school detention for the first time in my life. Story 11. In year 8, grade 7, I think, I had the science teacher who was an absolute Satan woman. Back then, I was a huge goody two-shoes, but she decided to pick on me for who knows what reason. One time, a whole bunch of us were let out of computer science late, and she only yelled at me. But that's not the worst thing. We were doing the periodic table, which is sorted into groups, the rows from left to right, and the periods. And we were learning these groups and periods. I remember her vividly going, "Sophie, which group is this?" She pointed to group 4, so I replied, group 4? And she then said, "List me some elements in group 4. So I began listing out some of the elements. We had the table in front of us, by the way. Wasn't from memory. I specifically remember reading the easy-to-pronounce ones out of the genuine fear she would yell at me for pronouncing them wrong, reading from left to right. I was wondering how many I would have to list when I'm suddenly asked, "Why are you skipping some out?" I wasn't aware I had to read them in order. She told me to list some, not several in order. I just stayed quiet. It was too awkward to say anything, and she gave me the most horrific death glare you've ever seen. The entire class just looked at me sympathetically, and she said, "I'll be seeing you after class." I had never been asked to be seen after class before, and to this day it's the only time I ever have. And she yelled at me for not following instructions, saying I had a bad work ethic. I hated this. It made me super sad. So I cried about it when I got home to my mother like the baby I was back then. She left or got fired, I don't know which, at the end of the year. I don't miss her. I hope she's actually torturing people who are not paying attention or doing the work now. Or even better, maybe not a teacher at all, so nobody else has to suffer. Story 12. In middle school, I was a truant. Skipped a few times and often had bad grades. That's about it. Well, in high school, I remember I was somehow able to view my disciplinary record for that school. And apparently I'd walked by a teacher's room and, quote, shone a laser in her eye and proceeded to run from her and hide in the restroom. And at that point, I had never owned a laser pointer, let alone done that. So they put somebody else's record on mine or made something up about me. Story 13. Not me, but a friend. The entire room was talking while the teacher was trying to get people's attention. Nobody was listening no matter how hard she tried. Well, everybody except for the one black kid who was sitting there quietly. She ended up directing her anger at him, removing him from the classroom. He was the nicest freaking kid growing up, too. Well, except for the one time when he threw his ruler with his name on it across the room, hitting the teacher. The teacher picked up the ruler, looked across the room where we both were standing, and then threw me out. Story 14. It was Halloween and I decided to give candy out to my other classmates. We've been friends from kindergarten to 11th grade since it's a charter school, and I already know the gist of who's allergic to what. Decided to give some out for Halloween with permission from my homeroom teacher, and got detention after school from my math teacher because I didn't ask. Straight up crazy. Story 15. I was the only Mexican in a mostly white private high school. Because of my ethnicity, the kids went around making rumors about how I was working as a drug dealer, and that I was probably always high in class. This was my freshman year, and I didn't even know what marijuana was at the time. Anyway, I come to school one day with my locker completely ripped apart. The teachers raided in my locker and didn't bother to clean up the mess they made. That's not what upset me, though. It was their alibi for doing so. They had told me they brought drug-sniffing dogs into the school and they were attracted to my locker. That's when I knew they were completely talking out of their butt. It's been 9 years and I'm still livid. Story 16. 1. Someone opened a package and tossed a few shreds of clear cellophane on the floor in front of their desk. I'd also dropped some paper in front of my desk. The teacher pointed and told me to clean up that mess. I cleaned up my paper. She came back and sent me to the principal because the cellophane that wasn't mine and I didn't even see was still there. First grade. And 2. A friend took another kid's lunchbox, playing around, and handed it to me. I tossed it 2 feet across the table to its waiting owner. The teacher gave me a detention for throwing things. 12th grade. It wouldn't be so bad if it weren't for the fact I did plenty of things deserving of punishment. Story 17. I got in trouble for participating in a group science experiment. The class was divided into several groups, 4 or 5 students per group. We didn't have benches for experiments since it was a standard classroom, not a science lab. So the equipment for each group was placed on a desk. My group mates were crowded around the desk and there wasn't really any room for me. Plus it was a simple experiment, so there wasn't anything for me to do anyway. So I sat at an adjacent desk, facing our group's equipment, and watched what my group mates were doing and took notes. The teacher decided that I, quote, wasn't participating, which wasn't entirely wrong, I guess, but refused to let me explain that there really wasn't room for me or anything for me to do, and I was taking notes on the experiment. He made me sit in the hall for the remainder of the class period and gave me detention, which I didn't even bother showing up for. Never got in trouble for skipping detention, which I thought was kind of weird. It's also kind of weird, OP, that the punishment for not participating is being removed from the class, as if that will help you participate. Stupid punishment. Story 18. I got caned for bullying a guy I'd never spoken to nor met. Turns out he burst out crying because his dad died. The teacher asked him why, and he said, "That guy over there has been bullying me about my dead dad all week," pointing me out across the yard. Me, oblivious, just going about my day. When I was getting the cane, the deputy head was shouting, "Never do it again," and I was shouting back, "I won't, sir," with no idea at all why I was there. No idea why I have a problem with authority now. No clue. I only found out the story a couple of years later when he apologized. I had been caned plenty of times since I did not give a crap by then. Story 19. In high school, friends and I played ultimate frisbee in the mornings out on a practice field. Not an official club, just screwing around. But most days we had a teacher there to make sure we didn't get hurt or sue the school for some BS. Anyway, one day we didn't have a teacher there, and the school officer/guard guy decided it was his chance to get us in deep crap. Being kids, we ran around the field/football stadium to get away from his lard butt. Eventually, the secondary guard and the first/main one cornered us and took down our names. They told us we'd be getting detention for running away from school, which wasn't the case. We just ran around a field from where he was. Whatever. So all day long, my friends and I are getting called down to the principal's office, telling their sides of the story in 2s and 3s. I never get called. See, I'm one of those people who's a junior but go by my middle name to avoid confusion with my dad. So when Lard Butt Officer took down our names, me not thinking just gave my name I go by. Middle, last. The school had no record of a kid with that name, so I didn't get called in. Why didn't they see my first, middle, and last name in the record and call me down? Who knows? Administration was dumb. Nobody got in actual trouble as everyone had the same story about running around the field and not away from the school grounds. But still, weird story about a fat guard, not happy kids were getting exercise and having fun early in the morning. Story 20. Wearing a black undershirt. We had a dress code at my school where you had to wear a collared shirt. They didn't really care about the color or design much, except you couldn't have really big words or logos on them. One day I actually got written up because I had on a black shirt underneath my collared shirt. The dean that wrote me up really hated me, so of course it was a really obscure rule that no one really cared about. But he liked to get me in trouble for whatever dress code violation he could. I got in trouble so much I was voted most likely to be out of dress code my senior year. Story 21. In the late 90s, high school had a keyboarding class to teach people how to type on computers. You know, home row and all that stuff. I had already been playing MUDs for a few years by then, so when I took the class, instead of typing, 15 words a minute with some accuracy, I was typing about 115 words per minute with accuracy. So after blowing through all of the material, I would end up just helping others, which is basically just reminding them to feel for the bumps and the keyboard and keep practicing. You can do it, that kind of stuff. I was told I was cheating and given an F. Screw that teacher. Story 22. Jesuit High School. Detention was called JUG. It stood for Justice Under God. It was in 30-minute intervals of sitting in silence, doing nothing after school. If you missed it without an excuse, it was doubled. There was a school rule that you had to check the JUG list every day. Well, I didn't. I was given 2 units intended for a kid with a similar name to mine. So by the time I realized I had JUG, it doubled down to 16 units. I explained my situation to the person in charge of discipline. He saw my point and removed the original 2. But since I broke the rule of checking the list, I had to do the other 14. Story 23. 4th grade winter, cold as hell. All I had were these thin gloves that did nothing towards keeping my hands warm. My hands were nearly frostbitten. I go inside during recess to warm up. Teacher sees me doing this and demands I go back outside despite my protests. I don't. I get sent to the principal's office. Joke's on you, jerk. I stayed warm. Story 24. I've had anxiety and depression since I was a kid, so obviously that means I have emotional issues. I really needed to talk to someone, so I would talk to one of the guidance counselors a lot. One time when I needed him, I think he wasn't available. I checked back later and the principal told me to stay in class. I went to check one more time if he was available. The principal happened to go by and gave me 2 days of detention. I made a big deal and he cut it to just 1 day. My middle school was freaking trash. Also, my high school accused me of terrorism, but that's another story. OP, that's a story we would like to hear. Why just tease us like that? Come on, man. Story 25. I was in kindergarten and I could not unbutton my pants button to use the restroom. I asked the teacher for help and she took scissors and cut off my button. I didn't have a belt and it happened early in the day. I couldn't play at recess or join activities because I had to hold my pants up all day. I was so embarrassed. I don't think my mom understood what I was trying to tell her and she assumed my button fell off. 30 years later and I still want to beat the crap out of that old idiot of a teacher. Her son, who was maybe in his late teens, was the TA, teacher's assistant, and he threw a ball at my feet during dodgeball as hard as he could. I flew headfirst into a steel bench. I had to get 12 stitches in my right ear because it almost sliced in half. Wow, this woke up some old anger. Story 26. Had a marker out and kid bumped into me. He turned around to say sorry and the marker grazed his shirt, leaving a small mark. We both said, oh, sorry, and was kind of funny. Some kid told the teacher I chased the kid with the marker to intentionally draw on him. The teacher didn't believe myself and the guy for some reason. I almost got caned by the principal. Instead, 2 lunch detentions. That was the day I lost faith in adults and knew they could actually be wrong and make mistakes. Story 27. I had quite a strange art teacher. She was always trying to look the best in front of everyone, but also loved to degrade children for being less talented than herself. One day we were supposed to draw a bench and she told us to only color it stroke by stroke, with color pencils and only in one direction. We also weren't allowed to rotate the paper because, quote, real artists never do that. And I later learned that was total BS. At that moment, I was like, if I color it equally strong, nobody will see the strokes either way. And art teacher noticed my technique, so I got suspended for coloring the way, a 7-year-old child would. Story 28. I have an identical twin. It was April Fool's Day in elementary school. We dressed the same and switched classes. Some kid snitches on us. Long story short, we got suspended from school for 5 days. We also did this in high school, switched classes, and same kid ratted us out. We got suspended again. The kid got boxed into a corner by us at the end of the day. Story 29. In my 3rd grade class, we had a wooden door to the bathroom that a small piece broke off of. It was small but sharp. Well, during my free time, my teacher didn't give a crap as long as we had fun. People were playing by the bathroom and someone grabbed the broken piece and poked another student with it. My teacher made everyone discreetly write on a note card the top 2 people who they thought did it. My name was one of them. The other kid got in trouble as well. Such a stupid method of sending kids to the office. It was me. I did not expect the twist at the end. I thought this was like it was a stupid way, of course they didn't know. But no, they actually got it right. Sending 2 people to the office, though, that is stupid. Surely only one of them could have actually done the poking. Story 30. I couldn't figure out how to do a problem in my math class. Had my engineer dad help me with it. The way he showed me wasn't the way she taught us. She walked around the next day to check our papers and sees my work doesn't match hers. She asks me why I didn't do it the way she told us to, and I told her I couldn't figure it out, but that my dad helped me with it, and I understand it this way. She went ballistic, full on screaming at me in front of the class about how I think I'm so smart and know so much more than her, how I'm just trying to make her look like an idiot and undermine her authority in front of her students, how I should have come to see her privately to tell her that instead of flaunting it in front of the class? What? Then she kicked me out. Not, go to the principal, just pointed at the door and told me to get out of her classroom. Went to the office and told them what happened. She never even called them to say she booted me. Never got in trouble officially and never got an apology from her. 5 years later, my brother was in her class and she blew up on him similarly for not paying attention in class. He has severe ADD that hadn't been diagnosed at the time. Story 31. I'm telling a story about my husband, as he was the one always in trouble at school for really silly stuff. My husband and his friends were taking shop class, and one day, they were instructed to engrave metal. My husband had a large chunk of metal that he engraved Halo into, with the hopes it would be used as a trophy. I'm not sure what caught my teacher's attention, but at lunch while my husband and his friends were passing around this block, a teacher approached his friend who was holding it. Who does that belong to? Points to my husband. What is it? Long silence, gears turning, Grinch smirk forming. Bomb? Long story short, my husband ended up in a locked room with police explaining how this block of metal titled Halo was indeed not a bomb. Story 32. Doing card tricks because the school has a rule against gambling. Having a folding chair with me. In summer PE class, socializing with the girls' PE class. And sub got angry for us wanting to work on our big group assignment that was due that week. We always had the same sub and she would waste half our class time with riddles. Story 33. I was drinking out of my water bottle, and the teacher wrote my name down on the whiteboard for lunch detention for being disruptive. Literally everyone at my table was arguing there was no way I was talking as I was actively taking a drink, but that teacher really disliked me and doubled down and gave me 2 lunch detentions. Story 34. Having a learning disability. I have trouble handwriting, but it's super easy to accommodate. Teachers would go out of their way to violate my 504 by keeping me from using the laptops and typing machines they let me use. I had one teacher that was a repeat offender that created so much work for administration that they pretty much sent me back whenever I showed up at the office. It was disruptive enough that eventually I just started screwing with him. He had this 3-strike rule before you were sent to the office, and he was rigidly committed to writing the last thing you did on the slip. I'd take the first 2 with the normal stuff like talking, and do a ton of really minor crap he couldn't justify sending me down for until he blew up. My best one was writing with a broken piece of pencil lead, not a pencil. Story 35. I once got in trouble because I told a kid where the teacher was. This little guy was being bullied for probably some justifiable reason, to be honest. I was over there near the basketball hoops and they were near the seesaws. He came over crying and was flubbering about like a koala that just fell out of a tree. I pointed out the teacher and told him she would help. I get called to the principal's office with the bullies. This dumb idiot named me as a bully too. I said I wasn't involved and said I sent him to the teacher. The bullies said I wasn't involved. I was too good. One of them is still friends with me to this day. But because the dumb idiot couldn't realize I sent him to the only damn person in the vicinity who could help him, I too was punished like the bullies were. Public shaming / apology. and in the permanent record. Story 36. Gambling. It's not gambling if you're using Monopoly money to bet on blackjack. Also, I got in trouble for having bad coping mechanisms for the constant assault that they did nothing about. I was 13/14 and had no idea how to deal with it. It was terrible and constant, and the school didn't care at all. I got hit for my coping methods the same as the assaulters. Story 37. I got off through the back of the school bus 2 weeks before graduation in high school. I didn't have a way to pack a lunch, really, so I said screw it and left to go to Crystal's a block away. When I came back before lunch had even started, our class let out early, the principal was waiting for me. She kicked me out on the spot and wouldn't let me graduate. A few years later, I got my GED and joined the army. I forgot to mention our school did off-campus lunches, so me leaving wasn't the issue. It was the fact I brought back not a sack lunch. Story 38. A bit of background first. I grew up in a time where they only had just allowed girls to wear pants to school. Yeah, I'm old. It was a year or two after we were allowed pants that we got a new elementary school principal who was a cranky old biddy named Miss K. Emphasis on the Miss. In the 6th grade, we had an early heat wave, and the boys could wear shorts to school but not the girls. I didn't think that was fair, and we'd recently learned about petitions. Of course, I had to start a petition to allow shorts. I got a lot of kids to sign it and turned it in. I was then called to the principal's office where she admonished me about what a terrible thing I had done. Then she called my father at work saying, "Mr. C, we have a very serious situation with your daughter. She has started a petition for girls to wear shorts at school." I suddenly hear my father laughing hysterically over the phone. She says, "Mr. C, I don't think you understand how serious this is." And I can hear my father reply, "If she wants to wear shorts, let her wear shorts." She didn't have much to say after that, but hung up the phone and sent me back to class with a sour look on her face. Good news is that I won in the end, and we got to wear shorts. Story 39. I was an introvert in grade 7. I don't remember exactly what I said, but my teacher asked me something randomly and I answered something weird. So she asked, "Are you crazy?" And I said somehow we're all a little crazy. Whole class was cracking into laughter and my teacher was like, "Sit down, next." Never got in trouble, but it was a ballsy move by me for the first time in my life. Story 40. I had awkwardly long arms and legs in middle school. Our dress code said we had to wear shorts to the tip of our middle finger, which for me nearly went to my knees. I was wearing the longest, most modest shorts I could find, and still got sent to the principal's office for my shorts being too short. She sent me into the bathroom with a ruler to measure the inseam of my shorts to make sure they were long enough. It was mortifying to my nerdy, mousy self. My mom assured them, but it was by saying it was impossible for me to look provocative because I was so underdeveloped. Ouch, that friendly fire at the end. From mom of all people? Come on. But don't get me wrong, I fully believe that people should be able to wear whatever they want. But I also understand if an institution like a school wants to have their own rules. As long as those rules are, I don't know. I want to say not stupid, but that's so subjective. But you get what I mean, I think. Story 41. Not me, but the sister of a childhood friend of mine. Before I get into the story, a quick explanation of how lunch breaks worked at that school. At some point, the teachers' union had negotiated their way out of taking care of the kids during lunch. During lunch break, there were professional lunch monitors who would be responsible for the kids. Now to the story. A kid had a banana in his lunchbox that had gone bad, so he naturally threw it out. The lunch monitor, who had already made quite a terrible name for herself, was enraged that anyone would throw away food, regardless of the fact that no human being in their right mind would eat it anymore. The punishment was that every kid in the class had to take a bite out of the rotten banana that had already been in the garbage. The sister of the childhood friend of mine was the first one, and she puked. By the time the lunch monitor was at the second kid, something led to the exercise being aborted. I don't remember what it was, but thank God. The lunch monitor in question got off with a warning and continued working at that school for quite a while. Story 42. A girl dumped her tray of food on my head and down my back. They piled milk and ketchup and crap on it, so I grabbed her by her shirt and tried to punch her, but I got tackled by the janitor before I could. They wanted to suspend me for 3 days and her for only 1. My mom threw a fit and made them suspend the other girl for 3 days as well. And then my mom celebrated me standing up for myself by taking me to the movies and shopping while I was kicked out of school. I love her so much for this, because what they don't know is I'd already spent 1 day eating my lunch in the bathroom stall before deciding to go to lunch and just face her. Middle school sucked. Story 43. In 3rd grade, my teacher would write a student name in the corner of the board if they got in trouble and had to sit out recess for a few minutes. That would add up if you got in trouble more than once. I had this one sub who I swear just hated me. We got assigned into groups for something and this girl sitting next to me didn't hear what group she was in. So when her group huddled up, I leaned over and said, "You're in that group." She thanks me and goes to her group. Sub then yells at me and writes my name on the board for talking in class. It doesn't end there, however, and gets even more ridiculous. Another student got in trouble for talking in class, but she didn't see who it was, so she assumed it was me again and increased my timeout. Well, screw you too. Story 44. I'm 67 and went to a Catholic grammar school. In 6th grade, I got caught looking out the window on a beautiful spring day. The nun caught me and had me stand up at the front of the class so the rest of the class could sing Beautiful Dreamer at me. When they finished and when I went to go sit back down, the sister yelled and said she wasn't finished with me. She stood next to me and told the whole class I was an example of an ugly little boy. I could actually see some of the girls in the class's jaws drop as the nun went on and on about what an ugly, horrible person I was, nearly choked to death holding back tears in front of the class. If there is a hell, I hope she's in it. Story 45. 4th or 5th grade. So we have a large playground, and at the very back there's a chain link fence with trees and the like. One day I noticed that they had a blackberry bush growing on them, a very much so edible berry that my family would actually go out and pick a bunch of to make pies out of. So I tell my friends and some other people around. Now to note, I in fact do not like blackberries and never ate one. So a group of girls made this cult thing where they would eat the berries or something. The leader girl got sick because she used a stick to crush up the berries in a dustpan they found out there and ate them. We had a whole freaking ambulance come in and such because they thought it was poisonous. I got in trouble because I told them about the berries, and apparently this means I forced them to eat them. My mom got called and told the story. Needless to say, she tore the school a new one because of how stupid it was. I got let off the hook, but still easily one of the dumbest things to have ever happened. Story 46. My high school had a closed campus, meaning we weren't allowed to leave without a note from our parents. My senior year, my best friend and I went out the side door for a trip to McDonald's. We were student aides in the biology department, and the teachers were generally pretty lax in monitoring us. This time, however, one of the biology teachers decided to question our bags of delicious fragrant breakfast. All attempts at obfuscation and an attempt at bribery with hot apple pie were unsuccessful, and we reported to detention the next week. Strangely, we had no troubles at all later in the spring when we left to play 9 holes of golf during our back-to-back-to-back study halls and lunch. Story 47. The second half of my day in high school was spent bused to a horticultural park where different trades were taught. I was in landscaping mechanics, fixing engines, but there was also landscaping, floral design, horticulture itself, growing plants, and animal care. My sister was in that one, being the ones with the vehicles. End of class day, we rotated who was allowed to drive the Cushman vehicles around the park to empty trash cans and put them in the dumpster. One of my classmates had accidentally hit the garage door of the greenhouse and was banned from driving, but allowed to ride along still. One day I was driving with him as my helper. We stopped by the floral design building to take their garbage. That teacher was also the principal for the park. I heard her comment as we were leaving to her class if other student was driving. He wasn't, so I didn't think much of it. Once we were done, my mechanics teacher pulls me aside and asks if I let him drive, and I said no. He then tells me the principal said she watched me let him drive. Yeah, that's bullcrap. I went over to her classroom after school was out to speak with her, and all she kept screaming was, "I know what I saw!" It was at that point I realized authority can be wrong, but they can still enforce based on their incorrect belief. I was banned from driving school property afterwards. Screw you, Miss Gutter. Story 48. Found a burning toilet paper roll in the bathroom stall. Told the principal and got detention for it. Felt like I was getting interrogated during it. Kept on asking why I would light the toilet paper on fire, and told me she would let me go if I admitted it. I was like 7 or 8 when this happened. All in all, screw you, Miss Proctor. Story 49. Spitting. I was a kid and had a cold and had congestion in my throat, but the school had a rule where students aren't allowed to leave their spot in the cafeteria until excused. This includes getting up to use the bathroom or even to grab more tissues. While sitting there, I accidentally coughed up the mucus. There was no tissue for me to spit it into, and I kept it in my mouth, struggling to breathe because I had congestion in the nose, too. Finally, as I was getting either close to choking on the mucus or spitting it out, they excused us to leave the cafeteria. I held my breath, and the moment I got out, I accidentally spit it out before I reached the bathroom. Just as I spit it out, the school's principal happened to walk by. He sent me to timeout. It was the only time I've ever been to timeout in my life. Story 50. So once when I was in primary school, I got called into the head teacher's office. He was sat in there with a teaching assistant who had fetched me and another boy in the year below. So he started giving me a bollocking for hitting this kid. I tell him I didn't hit him, so he asks my accuser if that's true. The kid goes, "He didn't hit me, he just looked like he might." Okay, so at the age of like 10 or whatever, I looked mean. All good, right? Nope. Head teacher then starts bollocking me for what essentially boils down to not looking friendlier. I mean, what the hell? I was literally being told off because I looked like I might hit someone. In fairness, I was an absolute idiot of a child, and that head teacher really helped my behavior in general. But goddamn, the one time I actually didn't do anything and I still got told off for it. fuming. He didn't hit me, but he looked like he might is a crazy reason to get told on to. That kid had to feel like that was the right thing to say. And then the principal enforcing it too. What happened here? Like, I get it was probably OP's track record that didn't help, but come on. Story 41. I once saw a teacher who was well known for being a grumpy old bastard stop a young girl, maybe grade 4 or 6, and scold her for throwing away, quote, too much of her apple. This guy reaches into the schoolyard bin, the typical kind that are covered in gunk and smell like sewers, picks the apple back up, dusts it off with 2 fingers and hands it back to her, expecting her to polish that crap off. Story 52. The time when I brought a paper knife to school for project and used it to cut paper in another class. One of the girls who really didn't like me but sits next to me in that class reported me for wanting to murder her. Seriously. She said I was holding the knife at her and she felt threatened and scared. The teacher listened and without asking me for anything, got me into detention. But I never had any other troubling record. The thing that still bothers me is how they just assumed I'm wrong nonetheless. This kind of thing never happened again, but sometimes I still wonder if I look like a murderer naturally. Story 53. Not me, but my son when he was in like 3rd grade. Ridiculous principal had the audacity to call me in because his light blue polo shirt was the wrong shade of light blue. Are you freaking kidding me? She literally lectured me in the school office while a cheerleader was standing at the counter with her skirt hiked up so short her booty shorts were visible. More belt than skirt. Ordinarily, no biggie for a cheerleading uniform, but as a Christian school, I found it infuriating and unfair that my honor roll son got stressed out over this principal's bad judgment on which outfit warranted discipline and a parent conference. Realizing out was a total microaggression against my brown son. So not what Jesus would do. Yes, I pulled my kids out of that place. Still love Jesus, just can't stand some Christians. Story 54. Parochial school, 3rd grade. Got in trouble on show and tell day for wiggling my ears. Made the whole class laugh. My dad got called into Mother Superior's office the next day and was told of my, quote, disturbance. He told her, never stifle my daughter's sense of humor. It's an ugly world, and she's gonna need it. During summer that year, we got a letter saying I would be better suited in public school. Rest in peace, Papa. Thanks for always sticking up for your little girl. Story 55. My junior high had a dress code where you could only wear a few specific solid colors. On picture day in the 7th grade, I was wearing new brown corduroy pants that I loved. Mrs. Allred dress coded me because they were brown, not tan. I had to go to the office and wear some ugly slate blue pants for the rest of the day, which was only 1 period anyway, and they were too big for me. It was humiliating. Needless to say, almost every persuasive essay I had to write until my senior year of high school was an impassioned argument against dress codes. Just make the poor kids wear uniforms if they're gonna be rules. Story 56. So in 10th grade gym class, we were running laps and I had to stop. I had asthma growing up and was having a small attack, so I sat down on the bleachers to catch my breath. The gym teacher yells to me to keep running and I tell him no, I can't breathe. He yells again to keep running and I yell back, screw you, I'm having an asthma attack. He starts yelling louder at me and I said, go screw yourself, I'm going to the nurse, and start heading to the office. The school director comes into the nurse's office and pulls me to his office. I ended up getting an in-school suspension the next day and couldn't take the bus to or from school. Nothing happened to the teacher. Story 57. Talking to a teacher in hallway during last class of the day when I didn't have class. Teacher and I were talking during class change. Bell rang, we kept talking. Vice principal didn't like it. I got stuck in study hall/detention during the last class of day when normally I would leave. Got out of study hall to be teacher's aide to the one I'd been talking with. Grade papers, set up science experiments, just general help. Story 58. There was a cockroach on the lunch table and I stood up on the table and stepped on it. I was in 6th grade. Got sent to in school and then had lunch detention for a week. Turns out I really enjoyed being in school and lunch detention, and ended up spending a good amount of time there in middle school. The instructor was this guy, Mr. Hamilton, and he would do trivia about history and science and literature, and if you got the questions right, you would get extra milk or an extra sandwich. Well, I'm allergic to milk, but when I would get the questions correct, I would take the chocolate milk and give it away to the other kids who were there. That helped form some great relationships with kids all through high school. Some of them would even go out of their way to stop me from being bullied later on. OP was in there building connections. You thought you were punishing him? Absolutely not. He thrived there. Story 59. When I was in 6th grade, we were doing one of the times tables tests, and I finished first. When I tried to hand it in, the teacher yelled at me and said there was no way I could have finished it already, so sit back down and do it properly. The instant I sat down, her favorite student went to turn hers in, and the teacher smiled and said, "Good job." It's been ages since then, and I'm still not over it. I never understand these, because times tables you can tell pretty quickly if it's all right. Like, you can tell if things are correct, basically. So what that means is she just didn't look at all. Just assumed OP didn't do it correctly. That doesn't make any sense to me. Just look, at least. Story 60. I have so many stories. First grade. Most wonderful teacher ever, Mrs. Sims. Worst TA ever, Mrs. A name not worth remembering. We had to color a giraffe. Me, being an anxious wreck since I became cognizant, always shook, and I accidentally colored out of the lines. Worse, I decided to have fun and made the giraffe green. Coloring outside of the lines gave me a panic attack, so I scribbled maniacally all over the giraffe. The TA went off on me for coloring it wrong. Wonderful Mrs. Sims came to my rescue, but I was terrorized by the pure hatred in this jerk's voice and face. The anxiety when I color outside of the lines has stuck with me, and I'm a freaking artist now. Third grade. Jerk, Mrs. Beasley. It's photo day, so I brought my nice shoes to change into. We go, take the pics, and go back to class. She holds me back to ask me something unimportant. Since she held me up and she's yelling at kids to take their seats, I ask if I'm still allowed to put away my nice shoes and change into sneakers since gym is next. She agrees, no problem. Grab my sneakers and sit down. I'm putting them on quietly, and all of a sudden she roids out and slams a ruler on my desk for disrupting class by putting on my shoes. I just sat down. She'd held me up and she'd given me permission. Scared the ever-living daylights out of me. She loved slapping hard objects with that ruler. Apparently, lots of kids told their parents about various stuff she did because next year, she was fired. My mom wrote a long letter to the principal about it and called as well. This was one of many things Mrs. Beasley freaked out over. Fifth grade. Pokemon had just come out. I can't participate, I'm poor. My best friend at the time gave me a stack of cards right as free period ended. I thanked her and tucked them away in my desk. The other kids were still going through theirs. Absolute idiot, Mrs. White comes up, ignoring the kids actively playing with their cards, and demands the stack from me. I refused to give them back. My dad had to go to the school to get them. I wasn't even touching or looking at them at the time. Fifth grade, again. Idiot, Mrs. White, again. I was absent for a little over 2 weeks with pneumonia. I didn't understand something we were going over, so during free period I approached her with a question. Even though I'd just given her a doctor's note explaining I had freaking pneumonia, she got on her high horse and said, "Well, if you were in school, you'd understand," and refused to explain it. Gave up and started failing from that point on. She hated me because I was poor, and loved the rich students that came from the most expensive area in town. Sixth grade. Jerk, Mrs. Brown, math teacher. Married to the social studies teacher. She kept derailing math class for months to teach us about Black history and even quizzed us on it. I hated math and hated history. I didn't understand why the hell we were using a math class to learn history and being quizzed on it. My brain was too fried by the math. Come to find out I have dyscalculia. To even begin to retain the history. I asked her why we were learning history in math class and she went off on me and started losing my homework from then on. It was driving me insane because I could swear I turned it in, but nope, she didn't have it. Every student in that school hated her and prayed they wouldn't get her. Ultimately, this jerk was the straw that broke the camel's back and I left school in 7th grade. Went into homeschooling, was too anxious even for that, and dropped out at 16. Story 61. I went to a Catholic school with a dress code and everything. Boys weren't allowed to have facial hair. Well, our hot water heater went out over the weekend, and I wasn't about to shave with cold water. Come Monday, my religion teacher in first block sends me to the dean's office for violating the dress code by having a 5 o'clock shadow. I was 17. It took me 2 days to grow anything of note. I calmly explained to the dean that I couldn't shave because we didn't have any hot water at my house. She made me dry shave in her office before I could go back to class. I was mildly upset by that. Story 62. I have a treasure trove. I can't pick just one. I got in-school suspensions for all of the following. 1. Throwing water on my math teacher. No, I just simply forgot he didn't allow water bottles in his class. Absent-mindedly took a sip out of mine during homework time, to which he promptly came over, snatched it out of my hands as it was leaving my mouth, and yanked it toward himself without the cap on, splashing himself. I got sent to the principal's office where I was, quote, so lucky I only got an in-school suspension. 2. I smiled during an assembly. It was one of those drunk driving awareness assemblies before prom, and 2 of my friends were passing notes amongst themselves. This was before cell phones, and I saw one of them had drawn something obnoxious on one of the notes. I smiled at my friend who drew it, and continued watching the assembly. Less than 30 seconds later, a teacher appeared at my side and told me to go with them. We ducked behind the bleachers where they yelled at me, wanting to know if I thought drunk driving was a laughing matter and what the hell I was smiling about. They didn't wait for an answer before I was sent to the principal's office. 3. I didn't want to participate in gym class because I had bad cramps and felt horrible and asked if I could sit out. I was told no. So I headed down to the locker room to change, where I sat with a friend complaining about how bad my cramps were, and that I was going to put in minimal effort. It was a pickleball section we were doing, and I love pickleball and wouldn't normally want to sit it out. Evidently, my gym teacher heard me. I didn't know she came into the locker room behind me. She hollered at me to come see her in her office and sounded mad. I went in and she told me to get your butt to the principal's office and tell them why you don't want to participate. I told her I would gladly go to the principal. She just cussed at me. That's exactly what I did. The principal sent me to in-school for making up lies about my gym teacher because she said there's no way my gym teacher would use that language with me. Story 63. In middle school, I wore a shirt that said recruiter in rainbow letters. I'm not even gay, I just thought it was funny. The vice principal told me that if I didn't change into my gym shirt, I'd be suspended for promoting homosexuality. First of all, what the hell? Second of all, what the hell? I took the suspension. Note, this was like 2004-ish, so not the dark ages by any means, and this was in Los Angeles, which is supposed to be super progressive. Public school, go figure. Story 64. I reported bullying every single time it happened. I was taken aside and told it was normal and that I was bullied because I was on the bottom of the pecking order. I was then told to only report blatant bullying that left marks, so I wouldn't cause trouble amongst the private school families. My parents went in the next day with a threat to call the police for assault charges and demand the students brought to the school board if it continued. Miracle of all miracles, the bullying stopped. Story 65. Some kid came up to me during lunch the first week of 4th grade and said, "Want to see me make my face turn blue?" And I figured he had some weird health condition he could manipulate, like my friend that was missing part of his finger. So I enthusiastically said, "Sure." And he took a very deep breath, held it really hard, and promptly, well, fainted. The thing is, he cracked his head on the cafeteria floor and was bleeding. I was shocked and freaked out. I'd no idea what he was going to do. The monitor said I'd put him up to it, so even despite my protests, I got a week detention, as well as a really frightening chewing out by the principal. He was like bellowing at me about, "How could I?" Now, mind you, I'm new to school, like less than a week there, and this kid was a head taller and a grade older than my skinny little tomboy self. It was the deciding factor in my mom pulling me out of there and sending me to this very cool private prep day school, which she did at great personal expense as a single mom, but in the end, so grateful for it. I can't imagine the hell of continuing on at the other school. By the way, 2 days later, the kid was back, really sweet, and apologized to me and everything. Story 66. In high school, it was the last period of the day, and me and one of my buddies were arguing about something. It escalated to the point where he took a swing at me, and he missed, but I exclaimed, "What the hell?" And the teacher gave me a detention for swearing. The funniest one was the time I got mad about something, so I walked out of school in the middle of class, and they gave me 3-day out-of-school suspension. Oh yeah, giving me 3 days out of school really punished me for leaving early. Story 67. My 2 buddies and I got called into the dean's office around 9:30 on a Monday morning. He accused us all of doing coke in the bathrooms earlier that day. Apparently a security guard had found our coke in the bathroom, and the only reason they thought it was ours was because we were the only 3 kids who used the bathroom the day before it was found. We all denied it, and since they didn't have any hard evidence, they kind of let us go, but let us knew we were under their radar. Fast forward like 3 weeks and the same security guard that turned us in was caught doing coke in the bathroom. None of us know for sure, but we suspect the fiend was doing some early morning Monday blow when someone else walked into the bathroom, and to avoid being caught, he acted like he found it there. Safe to say, I thought I was going to jail for a solid couple of hours the day we were questioned. That's just such a sad excuse, man. Being like, no, it's the kids' drugs, not mine. That's when you know you've got a problem. Story 68. In 7th grade, a girl in science class claimed that someone stole her purse. The teacher, Mr. Acker, class A dongweed, made everyone stop class to search for it, and said that it must have been me or my lab partner because we were the, quote, dirt bags in the class. He grilled me for 10 minutes about where I hid the purse, then sent me to the principal's office. Turns out she left it in her locker. Also, for what it's worth, I was a straight A student. No idea where this all came from. Story 69. Got suspended for the first and only time my 11th grade year for flipping off a bus driver and yelling, "Learn how to drive, idiot," because the bus almost T-boned me. She ran the stop sign leaving the bus loop area and almost hit me on the main road. She gives me a look like it was my fault, so being the 16-year-old man I am, rolled down my window, shot her the middle finger, and a "learn how to drive." Well, it turns out she took down my plate. The next day I get called into office only to be told I'm being suspended for 2 weeks for verbally assaulting a staff member. They didn't care to hear anything I said on the matter. I wasn't a troublemaker and had never been suspended before. So I get home, tell my parents what happened, my dad laughs. My mom is mad at the way I handled it, but is more upset that the bus driver was the one in the wrong and I was punished for her crappy driving. She goes to the school and raises hell, and apparently asks if they would have suspended me if the female dog would have hit me. Gets me down to 3 days suspension instead of 2 weeks. Story 70. I had a teacher in 6th grade who didn't like me for whatever reason. She had a rule for me that I wasn't allowed to leave my desk under any circumstances. The principal knocked at the door, and with my desk being directly next to the door, I opened it for him. him. I got chewed out in front of the whole class for 15 minutes after he left and got 10 detentions. Left the school 2 months later after she made my dad spend $2,000 on getting me ADD tested, which only came out negative. Screw you, Miss Simon. Story 71. Pretty tame, but I remember doing some typing program and my keystrokes were not coming out right. So I look down to reposition my obviously incorrectly positioned hand, and some teacher who isn't even my teacher yells at me, saying, "I'm never gonna learn how to type if I look at the keyboard." Like, bruh, I ain't gonna learn if my hands aren't positioned right either. Story 72. I was born with hemihypertrophy. Basically, the right side of my body is markedly larger than the left side. It causes me to walk crooked if I don't make an effort to walk straight. Anyhow, I was pulled out of class one day by the vice principal and basically given a field sobriety test because they thought I was drunk. Talk about being embarrassed. Story 73. It's a tie. Fighting back after taking a punch to the face or laughing at a fart. In all honesty, I got yelled at for laughing at the fart, and the teacher asked me if I thought it was funny. I said, "Sir, the fart was funny, and I believe I have a right to laugh at it." That nearly started a riot. People fell out of their desks. I got Saturday school. Story 74. I wore eyeshadow to school in 6th grade. My teacher yelled at me, telling me it was inappropriate, and sent me to the bathroom to wash it off. I tried to wash it off as best I could, but I was sent back to the bathroom one more time after coming back to the classroom. Multiple students had complained about this teacher throughout the school year. Story 75. When I was in primary school, I found some scissors. I picked them up and went to put them back in the scissor box, but one of my classmates decided it was a good idea to shout, "She's a murderer!" And you want to know what's funny? I was threatened with a knife by one of my classmates and nothing was done, but I pick up some scissors and get yelled at. Hated that school. Story 76. In 7th grade, I turned in a biology report that took over a month to finish and the teacher lost it, but claimed I never turned it in to begin with. I told him that I turned it in and wasn't going to do another report for a late grade and that he should keep track of his students' work better. The teacher called my parents and sent me to the principal's office claiming I was defiant and skipping assignments. He found the report under his desk 2 weeks later and still counted the work late, which was at that point a minimum D. I really don't like that guy. Story 77. For doing my homework. Our school district decided to try a reading period during homeroom to increase the reading test scores. This meant you were required to read during homeroom and to do nothing else. You could bring anything though, any book, newspaper, or magazine. I go to detention for doing calculus homework during reading period. Seriously. Luckily, the vice principal laughed out loud when I responded as to why I was sent to him. Story 78. I had a purple dinosaur backpack with spikes on it that I had brought to school one day. Everyone in my homeroom Spanish class was asking me about it and thought it was cool within the first 10 minutes of class. My teacher immediately took it and said it was a distraction, and I could collect it at the end of the day. I thought it was unfair, but you know how the school system works, so I kept my cool. I asked if I could collect the contents of the backpack at least so I could, not fail the rest of my classes. She said, basically, "Well, you should have thought of that before bringing something distracting into class." Wouldn't even let me grab my things I had for her class. I immediately responded with, "That's not fair, you know that. I suggest you let me pass my other classes at least." And then I kind of let it slip with, "There's no need to be a female dog about this, it's only a backpack." She sent me to the principal's office and he told me he thought she was a female dog too. But rules are rules, and I got suspended. Story 79. This happened spring quarter to community college. I needed a medical procedure done. I told my instructor about it and she gave me a thumbs up and said we were only reviewing on Zoom anyway. Got the procedure. Instructor then proceeded to dock me 4 points because they grade on attendance. I told her IRL we have paid time off and that our state prohibits punishing a worker for taking sick leave. She said, "Well, this program deducts points for missing class." And then she deducted 4 points from professionalism for that same missed day. Double whammy of bullcrap. If it wasn't okay to miss class, then don't tell me it's okay for a medical procedure. Story 80. Went to a convent. The crap we got in trouble for was ridiculous. Fringe not clipped back, detention. Nails too long, detention. Didn't wear your blazer walking between classes in 35 Celsius heat, detention. 3 detentions, suspension. 2 suspensions, expelled. Grade 8, a friend going through a lot at home was cutting. Some teacher found out and the next day she was expelled for being satanic. In 3rd grade, I got in trouble for having untidy handwriting, dyslexic. Grade 4, I got detention because my dad didn't sign my homework diary once. School was such a nonsense. Story 81. 5th grade. I was so sick, begging to go to the nurse's office for 20 minutes. Even the kids who bullied me said they would walk down with me. I finally just left. With this jerk counting days of detention, then suspension, even counting swings of a paddle I was going to get, mid-90s I think. Passed out walking into the nurse's office. I woke up in the hospital family crying like I was dying. Had spinal meningitis. Mom went to school the next day and cusses this dude out from the classrooms to the principal office. One of those moms who doesn't cuss, but when she does. So in the end I didn't get in trouble, but yeah. Kind of shows how different times were back then. I still went back into his classroom and he still kept his job. With social media, I could only imagine what would have happened. Story 82. I was 17, valedictorian in a US school who gave me a fab education, but was abso-bloody-lutely clueless about directing exceptional students onward. My guidance counselor asked if I wanted to work in the city or country. I said I didn't know because I had so little experience in cities. He dismissed me as impossible to guide. I'd love to say I was a smart aleck who found success in some movie story arc, but the ignorance of a small-town counselor cost me greatly. I did overcome the deficiencies I was saddled with, but it took 7 years to conquer a uni education that cost wealthier students only 4 years, and I discovered after graduation just how much poor students were snorted at by the toffs. Sorry this isn't more entertaining, but the American dream is exceedingly broken when exceptional students can't reach their full potential because the system at the time rewarded the moneyed classes. 30 years later, it's only exponentially worse. Story 83. I got my one and only ever detention in 7th grade. My English teacher lost 3 works worth of assignments for one particular project we were working on for the entire class. She openly admitted she lost them to the class and apologized. She was eventually able to find most of them, but couldn't find mine. I burst into tears when she told me, and she apologized and said she remembered my work because it was well written, so she would still give me a good grade. Then she told me I'd be serving a week of after-school detentions because I didn't turn in 3 weeks of work. My parents and I tried to fight it, but the best we could get was the administrators agreeing it was only 1 day, and the teacher had to supervise instead of the normal teacher who handled it. She was mad because she had plans that day. I'm confused. Did the teacher forget that they lost 3 weeks worth of work? I don't understand what happened here. It just straight up sounds like the teacher forgot everything that happened before and then just gave OP detention. How does this even take place? Story 84. Someone made a giant plasticine dong in art class and threw it at me. Just as I was throwing it back, my art teacher walked back into the class and ordered me to take it to the deputy head teacher in his office. Had to walk along the hall with a big, thick dong with big balls and head. Bumped into a teacher, Mr. Little, who just kinda looked at me funny. Chapped the door to his office and was told to enter. However, it was a secretary who was in. She looked at me funny as well and told me to come back later. I walked back along the hall and flung the dong down the stairwell. I then hung around outside the class for a bit and then went in and told Mr. Anderson, the art teacher, that I was getting a letter sent home. He never checked up on it. So the short of the story is, a giant plasticine thick dong with huge balls and head with a big eye is not art. Story 85. In high school gym class when playing kickball, my teacher believed girls should play kickball, any sport for that matter, like a lady. So when a dude was blocking third base and preventing me from tagging safe, I knocked him over and tagged up before the ball could be thrown to call me out. My teacher called a foul on me simply because a chick knocked over a dude, as most of the class protested due to the teacher in the last inning not calling another dude for doing the same thing. I called BS with those words, and was asked to see the principal. Sure, I said. I'm happy to talk to the principal and the athletic director about Title IX. Teacher started backtracking, and I walked out to the principal's office. Had no issues after that in class. I do love the stories where the whole class stands up for OP. It's good to know that a lot of kids can see the stupid injustice even when it's not directed towards them. Ironically, being taught about rules and injustice, just not by the teachers. And in this case, sexism too. Amazing. Glad you stood up for yourself, OP. That was a garbage rule. Or not even rule. It was just a garbage, punishment? Reason for punishment? I don't know what to say. Anyway, that's the last story we have for today. I would like to thank you all so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.